Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. Here's the second of those little tidbits about changing the name of something that I found in a recent article. After Canadians developed an oil from the rapeseed plant, they still had to deal with the name. So, in 1988, the FDA approved a name change to canola oil, and sales shot up. That's the oil, in fact, that we even use in my home. This week, we aren't looking at changing names. Rather, we are looking at 7 different men from the Bible, all who had one name, the name Joseph. And as well known as the Joseph we looked at yesterday is, today's Joseph might be even more well known. Today we want to look at Joseph, the husband of Mary. To be frank, most of what we know about this Joseph comes from the days just prior to Jesus' birth. Joseph was betrothed to Mary. Now, a betrothal in those days was a little bit more than what we might consider an engagement to be, but less than living together. Clearly, a plan of marriage had been arranged between them, so it was like an engagement in that way, but it was also something of a trial period too. The normal expectation would be that in the morning Mary would go to Joseph's house and spend the day running the household like a wife would do while Joseph worked. She would prepare the meals, draw the water along with any other domestic chores, and then in the evening she would go home to her parents' house until the next day. This was how they got to know one another and prepare for their life together. The other thing you need to know about this whole thing is that many scholars suspect that according to the traditions at the time, Mary was probably about 14 years old at that point. Joseph was likely significantly older, perhaps even as old as 30. This is how things were done in that time. The other thing we seem to think about Joseph was that he was a carpenter. The Bible even refers to Jesus as the carpenter's son. Now, we know what a carpenter does in our day, but once again, things were a little different then. In New Testament times, carpenter was the term for an all-around handyman. Yes, he could build things made of wood, but he was also skilled in fixing things that were broken, making repairs and things like that. He knew how to fix things. That's the trade Jesus grew up learning. What we learn about Joseph from the stories of Jesus' birth shows that he was a profoundly faithful and caring man. When Mary turned up pregnant, Joseph knew the child wasn't his, but rather than cause a furor over it, the Bible tells us that he decided to divorce Mary quietly. And yes, even though they weren't officially married yet, the betrothal arrangement was so binding that it required a divorce to dissolve. That decision on his part showed that he actually loved Mary a great deal. Most people would loudly proclaim their innocence, especially in a culture that killed women for sexual relations out of wedlock. Most people would have denounced Mary and sought to preserve their righteousness and their own dignity. Not Joseph. He cared for Mary and for what would happen to her, and that was more important to him than his own position in society. The second thing we learn from all this is that Joseph was profoundly faithful to God as well. When an angel appeared to him in a dream and explained that Mary was pregnant by an act of God, Joseph believed and acted as the angel had told him. In fact, angels appear to Joseph several times and direct him to do things, all of which he obeys quickly and completely. The way the Bible seems to tell it, The other word might be unquestioningly. Joseph is faithful. One significant thing about Joseph in the Gospel of Matthew is that because of this clear obedience to God, Joseph is the only person other than Jesus who is called righteous. We might wonder what happened to Joseph and why he doesn't appear at any point in the stories of Jesus' ministry and death. Some have wondered if he never became a follower of Jesus. But the much more likely scenario is that by the time Jesus began his ministry, Joseph had died. In his obedience to God, in his compassion for those in trouble like Mary, in his faithful devotion, Joseph, husband of Mary, is a man to admire. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.